Super Tuesday, finally here.
It's a super morning.
Super Tuesday Part 2.
Super Tuesday Part 3. Another Super Tuesday. They're called the Acela primaries.
Acela? Is that how you say it? The Acela primaries.
It's hard not to miss it. It's hard not to miss it. All right, happy Hillary Clinton's Superest Tuesday, sports fans. No matter what happens in California, New Jersey, and the other states that are voting tonight, Hillary Clinton will stand on a stage at the Navy Yard in Brooklyn later this evening and declare that she is now finally her party's presumptive nominee. We'll talk about that historic moment in a moment. But first, after another 24 hours of scathing reactions to Donald Trump's comments about U.S. federal judge Gonzalo Curiel, the Republican presumptive nominee released a statement late this afternoon that reads in part, quote, "It is unfortunate that my comments have been misconstrued as a categorical attack against people of Mexican heritage. I am friends with and employ thousands of people of Mexican and Hispanic descent. The American justice system relies on fair and impartial judges. All judges should be held to that standard. I do not feel that one's heritage makes them incapable of being impartial, but based on the rulings that I have received in the Trump University civil case, I feel justified in questioning whether I am receiving a fair trial. I do not intend to comment on this matter any further," end quote. Trump's statement seems to be a response to, as I said, another wave of condemnation from fellow Republicans. Senator Tim Scott, the upper chamber's only black Republican, is calling Trump's remarks, quote, "racially toxic." Senator Lindsey Graham all but urged his colleagues to unendorse their party's presumptive nominee. And Illinois Senator Mark Kirk basically did that. He's running for re-election this year and said that he would support Trump for president. He put out a statement today saying, quote, "I cannot and will not support my party's nominee for president." And after denouncing Trump's words a few days ago, House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell spoke to reporters in D.C. today and once again expressed their disapproval in the strongest possible terms.
I disavow these requirements. I regret those comments that he made. I don't think claiming a person can't do the job because of their race is sort of like the textbook definition of a racist comment. I think that should be absolutely disavowed. It's absolutely unacceptable.
We have plenty of issues, and my advice to our nominee would be to start talking about the issues that the American people care about, and to start doing it now. In addition to that, it's time to quit attacking various people that you competed with or various minority groups in the country and get on message.
As Trump instructed during that conference call that Bloomberg Politics reported on yesterday, his allies have been on cable TV all day trying to get this thing under control, arguing that there was no racial element in Trump's criticism of Judge Curiel. Some surrogates, like former Reagan staffer Jeffrey Lord, actually accused Trump's critics of being the ones using racist statements in this fight.
Let me make no bones about it. Speaker Ryan is wrong, and Speaker Ryan has apparently switched positions and is now supporting identity politics, which is racist. I mean, I am astonished.
So you're accusing Paul Ryan? You're accusing Paul Ryan of racism?
I am accusing anybody who believes in identity politics, which he apparently now does, of playing the race card. The Republican establishment is playing this. Senator McConnell is playing this. These people have run and hid and borrowed the Democratic agenda of playing the race card.
So, Mark, up until this afternoon in the Trump statement, this controversy did not seem to be losing steam at all. If anything, it seemed to be gathering momentum going forward with all the stuff that's happened. But my question to you is, now that Trump has addressed the matter with this statement, do you think that is the beginning of him putting it behind him?
This will put some of it behind him for some people. It's too soon to say just how much this will cure. What is clear is that he can't unring the bell of what he said, particularly with, this is as close to an apology as he gets, but it's not a full-throated apology. He basically says, I'm sorry if you mistakenly didn't understand what I was saying. A lot of Republicans will be spooked by this. They knew the guy said controversial things, but they hoped it wouldn't be this controversial and offensive to so many, and they also hoped that he would stop after he became the presumptive nominee. I think that we will see over the next few days how he behaves. He's going to try not to do this again, but this has spooked a lot of Republicans.
Well, yes, because it seems to suggest that he has no capacity for self-control. He brought the whole thing entirely on himself and then continued, as we discussed yesterday, to keep going and going and going. Now, apparently, he looked at the chaos and sort of just tried to slam on the brakes. He didn't apologize, as you know well, saying that you're sorry that all you misconstrued my comments is not an apology at all. And, you know, there's nothing in it that explains how, when he said before, he's Hispanic and therefore he can't be impartial in my case, how he didn't walk that back. All he says now is he's still impartial. He's still not impartial. So he doesn't explain why he's not capable of rendering impartial justice in this statement whatsoever, and he doesn't really even walk back the comments that he made, except for saying, I'm sorry some of you got this wrong. I think that Republicans will still be freaked by this for a long time. I think the ones who want to be behind him will be happy that he seems to have come to his senses, at least momentarily. But I don't think that they will think, I don't think that they will be looking at this and saying, oh, well, everything's all fine now.
Reince Priebus, the chairman of the party, who is under extraordinary pressure to clean this up because he's one of the few people who has regular interaction with Trump. He said early in this cycle, for the Republicans to win the White House back, given their performance in the last 6 presidential elections, they needed to run a perfect campaign. Right. Amongst the things that this illustrates is Trump's not going to run a perfect campaign. Right. And Republicans are going to have to decide how to grapple with it. The condemnation of the Speaker of the House, of his own party's presumptive nominee, is extraordinary. Get used to it. There's going to be more of it. All right. On the Democratic side, Washington, D.C. primary did not happen until next week. But the other last 6 states in this very dramatic nominating contest are having contests today. Last night, the Associated Press and NBC and others reported that according to their calculations, Clinton had reached the mega majestic magic number, the 2,383 delegates, some pledged and some super, that she needs to advance the general election as her party's standard bearer. For weeks, it's been clear that Clinton was almost certainly going to become the first female presidential nominee of a major political party, a national and international milestone. But that doesn't make this moment arriving, even though it's not official yet, any less historic. Out on the West Coast, Bernie Sanders is going to take the stage to rally tonight in Santa Monica, California, and almost certainly say that his campaign has exceeded all expectations, accomplished more than anyone could ever have dreamed of, and that he'll be on those points, he'll be 100% correct. What we don't know at this point, though, is what Sanders' next move will be, how Clinton is going to handle her victory exactly, and what the delegate dance between the two of them will look like as it plays out over the next few days. So we know that Sanders has said, and his team has said, he's going to the convention. They've said he's going to go through certainly the D.C. primary. We know he says he's going to keep up the fight. You and I have discussed at length the fact that that may change. But just talk about how you see the dance between Clinton and Bernie Sanders playing out starting this evening and into the coming weeks.
Well, there's a third party now involved between those two. There's a third party involved in the dance, and that's President Obama. We know he talked to Bernie Sanders over the weekend, had a lengthy phone call.
Man's got a Nobel Peace Prize.
Had a lengthy phone call with Sanders. And I think the White House right now is being deferential. President Obama wants to endorse Hillary Clinton as soon as possible. But they're being deferential because they recognize that there are negotiations and conversations happening between the Sanders campaign and the Clinton campaign on exactly this question, how this dance is going to play out. I think President Obama will have endorsed Hillary Clinton by the end of the week. He's not going to endorse her tonight, but one of these days before, one of these weekdays that are left, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that endorsement will happen. But other things will happen before that happens, and those things will be between the Clinton and Sanders people. And I think what happens in California will affect that negotiation of how Sanders and Clinton choreograph the denouement here.
Yeah. I mean, look, if Bernie Sanders could take his fight to the convention in Philadelphia, if he could keep his supporters rallied, if he could have his name put in nomination, if he could see if there were any developments that maybe would cause superdelegates to turn against Hillary Clinton, he would do it for sure. The question is, can he be persuaded that staying in damages her? And is there a way to stay in without damaging her? My gut still is that if he can figure out a way to do that, and he can be convinced and can convince people around him that he's not going to hurt her chance of winning a general election, I think he wants to stay in, because you and I have said before, this is not, from his point of view and his supporters' point of view, brand X and brand Y. These are two different visions of what the party should be and how our politics needs to change.
He may go into a passive campaign mode, but I think what's true is that it's clear to me now, at least, that Sanders cares less about the platform. And if you look at the people who put on the platform negotiating committee, you can tell that he's not that serious about trying to fix the Democratic platform to his liking. I think he cares about reforming the process. And I think the argument that President Obama and others around him will be making, and that the Clinton people are too, is that he has a higher degree of leverage if he gets on board than if he holds out. And that by holding out, as everyone else in the party piles in behind her, he may be left behind and lose leverage. That may change his thinking as much as anything else.
Here's the greatest cop-out ever. I'd be surprised at no outcome. Anything's possible.
Okay. Priorities USA, the super PAC supporting Hillary Clinton, is out with a new TV ad about that time that Donald Trump apparently mocked a New York Times reporter's physical disability. We will talk to Guy Cecil, the man behind that ad, next. But first, we'll have this quick work and word from our sponsors.
In commemoration of spring and the start of the unofficial general election, Priorities USA, the pro-Clinton super PAC, has a new TV ad hitting the airways in Ohio, Virginia, Florida, and some other general election battleground states. It features the Ohio parents of a child with a rare physical disability talking about their outrage about that moment a few months ago when Donald Trump seemed to imitate Serge Kovaleski, a New York Times reporter who also has a physical disability. Joining us from Washington now to discuss that new ad, the Democratic race, and oh, so much more, the co-chair and chief strategist of Priorities USA, Guy Cecil, and here with us to talk about the Democratic race, Margaret Talev, our senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg Politics. Margaret and Guy, thank you for joining us. Guy, early advertising, we've talked about this before. Are you convinced that you, the campaign, and other Clinton allies can effectively end this race before the conventions by defining Donald Trump on your terms?
No, I expect that we're going to continue to advertise all the way through the end, and that's what will be required, because not every voter is fully paying attention to the general election. They're out living their lives, taking care of their kids. But we do know that as the primaries come to a close, that people are starting to pay attention, and we want to make sure that we're filling in the blanks on Donald Trump and his view of the presidency, his view of the world, and his view of most Americans.
Guy, I'd like to ask you this question real quick before I turn to Margaret. What's the percentage likelihood that we're going to see an ad out of your organization that has Paul Ryan saying that Donald Trump's comments about Judge Curiel were the textbook definition of racist?
Better than even.
Right.
How's that?
That's fabulous. I'm sure 100% accurate. Margaret, we were just talking about the dance between Clinton and Sanders, and that it will also involve President Obama as we go forward. A bunch of endorsements that Hillary Clinton is going to get, right? She's going to get Barack Obama's endorsement. She's going to get Joe Biden's endorsement. She's going to get a whole bunch of endorsements. Just talk about like what you think the timing is for that and how those things are likely to play out.
So we know that Hillary Clinton is going to be holding major campaign appearances next week in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. Not just in Ohio, but in the place where the Republicans are having their convention. That's going to be an important day for her, and as many of those endorsements as she can get locked down before then, out in public before then, and perhaps on stage with her then. So the next, well, week, 6 days will be a really big time frame.
And you assume that she's going to do a public event at some point there with President Obama in that, like in this week stretch, not tomorrow in New York, but at some point soon.
I would assume that they're trying to do that within the next week, or at least to get certainly the endorsement in the next couple of days. If you look back in 2008, she was within 3 or 4 days, about 4 days after he had clinched the nomination, she was publicly standing behind him. But it was a couple weeks after that before they had their first big appearance together. And there's a lot of stagecraft that goes into that. But there was not the same concern, you know, really back then that there could be this sort of slow drag on him. He had so much momentum, so much energy and enthusiasm behind him in a way that she just hasn't yet.
Hey, Guy, you've followed politics for a long time and worked in it for a long time. You ever seen any candidate for any office do the kind of thing Donald Trump has done in the last few days regarding Trump University and Judge Curiel?
No, and I haven't seen that many human beings behave in such a horrible way. And putting out a statement that says, not I'm sorry, not I was wrong, but that some of my best friends are Hispanic is not an acceptable response to what can only be described directly and simply as a racist attack on an American judge. And the idea that he could put out a statement that was clearly written by somebody else and that that's going to solve his problem, I think, is pretty short-sighted. This is going to stick with him, I think, for a while.
Margaret?
Well, I think it's interesting the role that the judicial system is playing in this election so far, first with the Supreme Court thing and now with this. But this is certainly a problem for Donald Trump. And for Hillary Clinton, it's a moment where she may want to be taking a victory lap, like, hey, I'm the first woman. But it's also a moment where she just want to get out of the way and let Donald Trump's problems unfold without interruption for a couple of days.
What do you think about the question of leverage and what Senator Sanders is going to go about trying to do here? You know, there was not that much that Hillary Clinton in 2008 actually wanted from Barack Obama. And so she, except she wanted a future in Democratic politics. And so she eventually, for a variety of reasons, decided to make peace pretty quick. What do you think now, reading the tea leaves, Sanders wants, and how will he go about trying to get it?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, for a long time, a discussion about whether he wanted to adjust the platform. And many Democratic advisors have told him, why? Nobody cares about that. Certainly he wants to affect the nominating process in many of the states. California is a good example of a place where, as independents have been brought into the fold, it's helped candidates like Bernie Sanders. He would like to take that to other states, and he would like to have some legacy for himself. Maybe not a future in the same sense that he would if he were 35, but a future for the next several years as he returns to the Senate. He wants to be not forgotten and left behind. But for Hillary Clinton, she has another lever to pull. She'd like for Bernie to come around quickly and on his own terms. But if he doesn't, she has Donald Trump as a lever to get his supporters on board with her.
I want to switch topics to the very bad jobs report that came out. For those Americans who are concerned still about the economy, what are things that Hillary Clinton is saying she'd do as president different than Barack Obama that would help them find jobs with good wages?
Well, I think there's a number of things. First of all, I wouldn't be surprised if within the first few months of her administration we see a pretty significant infrastructure bill. And I think it has a relatively decent chance of passing because Republicans are going to be reeling from 5 months of racist comments from Donald Trump. I think raising the minimum wage will certainly be part of it. She's laid out a pretty comprehensive clean energy plan. So I think there's a host of things that she's focused on. In fact, I think of all the people running for president so far, she's probably been the one who has released the most detailed plans of anybody, not only on the economy, but on a number of other issues.
Guy Cecil, thank you very much. Margaret Talent, thank you. Coming up, our next guest has got his mind on the money and the money on the mind. He's the finance chair of the Republican Governors Association, longtime Republican wise man, Fred Malek, after this.
Got his mind on his money. Next up in our parade of great guests tonight, Republican strategist and finance chairman of the Republican Governors Association, Fred Malek, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Fred, let me ask you this question. Back on May 31st in the Washington Post, you wrote a pretty tough op-ed about Donald Trump after he attacked Susana Martinez, and you worried about his lack of discipline and told him he needed to change. That was all before the entire huge controversy of Judge Curiel. So at this moment, how do you think what kind of progress is Donald Trump making in changing in a way that you think is going to help him win the presidency so far?
Well, to my surprise, he's not taking my advice. I don't think he's taking it. I think he's kind of doubled down on some of his criticisms, although I think it's a step in the right direction to try to step out of it in his statement today. But nevertheless, I found his statement on Judge Curiel to be rather distasteful and discouraging. There are a lot of us in the Republican Party who want to come around and support the nominee of our party. He's just making it more difficult.
Fred, you probably talked to, if not the exact same donors we've talked to, the same kind of donors and bundlers and big financial supporters of the party. Give us a sense of how freaked out people have been in the last 72 hours.
Well, I think people have been looking for Donald Trump, once he secured the nomination, to be kind of moved more toward a not a centrist position, but a position that unifies rather than divides. I think they're looking for him to be more presidential and to bring people together and to make peace with all important groups in our country that are going to be so important in the vote in November. And I think there's disappointment that he hasn't done that yet.
But Fred, if I
moving in that direction.
Fred, if I can interrupt, you said disappointed. My guess is you've heard more than disappointment. You've heard people freaking out and wondering, is this really our nominee? Is that not true?
No, it's really not true. People accept that this is our nominee. Look, many of us would have pined for Paul Ryan, a Mitt Romney, or even a Jeb Bush, or a David Petraeus, or Stan McChrystal, or somebody like that. It would be great if we'd had our choice. But we didn't. He won. He won fair and square, and he is the nominee. Now you got a choice. Do you support the nominee or your party, or don't you? I think that the point is people are still of an opinion that we need to change the direction of the country, and that's why they want to be supportive of this nominee.
Fred, you said before that you thought that Trump's comments about Judge Curiel were distasteful. Today, Paul Ryan said they were the textbook definition of racist. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I'm not going to comment on what a definition of racist is. I put out a tweet earlier that said I was very disappointed in it, that I found it, I don't remember the exact words, but even more reprehensible than his comments on Susana Martinez. I think it's perfectly fair to question a judge's impartiality to do it in court, but not based on his ethnicity. I think that's wrong, and I think it really speaks so ill of him. And you know what? It hurts him more than anybody else. So to go to the question of discipline that you raised in your op-ed, Fred, you know, this controversy broke out now several days ago, and yet yesterday Trump was continuing, until today, was continuing to go further and further, repeating these criticisms, urging his surrogates to repeat them. Does that speak of a kind of discipline that's required of a nominee of either party, for that matter, to be a successful presidential candidate? Well, in my op-ed, I spoke to the lack of discipline and the fact that he must have more discipline if he's going to win the election. You got to sit back and think about what you're going to say and how it's going to affect people. It's hard to believe that he would sit back and think, gee, if I attack this judge based on his ethnicity, that's going to be a good thing. It just doesn't seem it's plausible that anybody would think that's a good thing. Right. So I was highly disappointed that he did it, and it does speak to a lack of discipline. He needs to bring it together. We want to be there for him, but unless he can bring it together and give us a reason and show he's a man of inclusion, not exclusion, and be more tolerant of others, it's going to be very hard for us all to rally behind him.
Fred, can you explain the constellation of Trump super PACs and how a wealthy Republican who wants to help him should decide which one to give to?
Well, I think you're overemphasizing super PACs to start with, and I don't understand the constellation. I think they're, if Sheldon Adelson is giving $100 billion to one, that's one I'd want to be associated with. But I think even more important than the super PACs, and something that's not been reported on too much, is the fact that you need money in your campaign chest, not just in the super PAC. It's the campaign that hires the people that run the organization, that put out the ads that you can target, put out the direct mail, that develops the organizations in the states. These are organizations that have been put together over decades by the Clintons and several years by any other presidential candidate. He's got 2 months to do it. He's going to have a serious financial disadvantage to Hillary Clinton.
All right, Fred Malik, sorry we got to cut you off and get to break. Thank you for coming on the show. When we come back, David French, we'll talk about why he decided not to run for president right after this.
Last week, all the political world was wondering who was Bill Kristol talking about when he suggested that there was going to be a third-party presidential bid by someone with a good chance of winning. Turned out he was talking about our next guest, David French, who's a lawyer, a writer for National Review, a veteran of the Iraq War, and a Tennessean. French announced on Sunday he was not going to enter the race, and he joins us now to talk about all of this. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
When was the very first time in your life someone suggested to you or you thought about the notion of running for president?
About a little less than 2 weeks ago, meeting with Bill Kristol and talking about the times that we're in. And, you know, I think that there's almost two categories of people that are emerging right now. Those who understand the gravity of the challenge we're facing in politics now and how serious, for example, the threat of Donald Trump is, not just to politics, but to civil society, as we've seen in this judge controversy. And those who think we're in some sort of land of politics as usual, just with a little bit more outrageousness to it. I'm in the camp that believes and understands this is something else entirely. And when other people weren't stepping up, and Bill asked me if I'd consider it, I said yes, I would consider it.
So did he tweet, when he tweeted to suggest that it was happening, because he had you in mind, was that with your authorization? Did you let him to believe you were going to do it?
That was a surprise, I have to say.
Well, surprised he did, but did he have reason to believe that at that point you were going to do it?
He had reason to believe I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he wouldn't have just tweeted that out as some sort of...
Well, but he tweeted that it was happening, not that you were thinking about it.
It will happen, you know?
It's easy to read an awful lot into 140 characters. Yeah. It was a process under consideration. And, you know, I fully recognize, gentlemen, that I don't have name recognition, but I also recognize, and I heard this analogy today, that the demand for an alternative, it's almost like a pressure cooker, that there is an enormous amount of pent-up demand. Even people who are supporting Trump are doing so very reluctantly. There's a segment of Democrats supporting Hillary Clinton very reluctantly. So there's pent-up demand there. We need the right person to release that demand into our culture, into our politics. And so recognizing the pent-up demand, you know, I wanted to give it serious thought to see if, you know, there was a chance that I could be helpful in that process.
Was there one decisive factor, or what were the decisive, like the key decisive factors that led you to conclude that this was just not something for you to do?
I'll tell you, it's very simple. I believed, honestly, at the end of the day, even though there wasn't really anyone stepping up, waiting in the wings at that time, that I would end up doing more harm than good. That I'd heard a lot of people saying, well, you have a good biography and people will like you when they get to know you. But, in that circumstance, that's a huge challenge. There's a need for a person with an existing constituency. And if I went forward and it fizzled, which was a likelihood, then it would give a misimpression to the American people and to the larger body politic that there's fewer people like me than there really are, people who are disgusted with the status quo. And so it's better for there to be somebody who has that constituency to take advantage of the 65% of American people who are willing to look for a third alternative.
There are people, friends of Bill Kristol's and others, who right now are back at it, especially in the wake of the Judge Curiel comments, trying to find someone to pick up this mantle. Are you actively involved in that process at all?
I have been involved in meetings where we are directly talking about that, and I know there will be people who will be approached specifically. And I hope that, they can consider it in a different atmosphere that I did, which is not with everyone talking about it, but take some time with their families and think about it quietly, run the traps on it, take a look at the actual numbers, the actual work that's been done, and I think they'll see it's very viable.
I assume you're not interested in breaking news on who those people are right now on the show.
Under the golden rule of I would not like to do to others that it's the same experience I had, no.
So what kind of people are you talking about? People that will be approached? I mean, again, people like you, or people who are more conventionally suited maybe to running for president?
I think if there's one thing we learned in this process with me, so happy to serve as a guinea pig here, was that number one, there is demand. There were people contacting me from all over the country. I'm willing to quit my job tomorrow to help you. But if you want to get the $25 million or so that's necessary to really explode out on those ballots, you need that existing constituency. And that's something that I lacked. And so, the message that we can give to somebody else is pretty clear. If you have that existing constituency, if you either have money yourself or you have access to fundraising, quick access to fundraising network, it is there. All that stuff you hear about a ballot access problem being insurmountable, false. All that stuff that you hear about third-party candidates never have a chance. So since when has this cycle been normal?
So the French presidential campaign lasted about a week, a little bit less.
Well, we'll call it the potential, yes.
I know you had some unpleasant aspects of it, but just talk about what it was like for your family to see you on the news everywhere and people talking about you in a way that had never happened before. What was that like in the upside of it?
Well, was there an upside? I'm trying to think.
It'd be kind of heady. No?
Not really. I mean, our family has already experienced the downside of being against Trump, and not in that circumstance, not from the Trump campaign, but the Trump supporters. It was a circumstance, look, my older kids understand what's going on. My wife understands what's going on. She's opposed to Trump and to Clinton, and she knows the gravity of the time. So it was a weighty thing. It wasn't a heady moment.
You're a man who thinks of everything, and I'm sure you thought ahead. Let's hear what was the zinger you were going to use on the debate against Trump? Let's hear one of those zingers. Come on.
The zinger that I was going to use. All I was going to do with Trump was remind him of what he said. He was going to try to pretend to the American people that he was a serious candidate for president. And I was going to remind the American people that he thinks that Exxon can help beat ISIS.
Would you have been nervous in the debates?
Oh, of course. I mean, I'm a rational human being. Who wouldn't be nervous in the debates? I'm sure Trump was at least once or twice.
You don't seem nervous now.
I hide it well. Maybe I have a better
I'm predicting right now you're going to be an excellent Jeopardy answer at some point. That's my prediction.
Maybe in the $200 category.
David French of Tennessee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
When we come back, we follow Bernie Sanders' followers around California as the nomination season wrapped up. What we learned after this.
Since Bernie Sanders launched his presidential bid 13 months ago, the Democratic nominating contest has been something that nobody thought it would be: interesting. Last night, when the AP called the race for Hillary Clinton, it only fueled Sanders supporters' distrust of the mainstream media and the political establishment. As this phase of the campaign ends, with Sanders all but certain to fall short of the nomination, we wanted to know what the final leg has been like for his voters in California, where he's been barnstorming for the past 2 weeks. What we found was that just as California is a microcosm of America, the Sanders phenomenon in the Golden State is a microcosm of the movement he unexpectedly inspired all across the country.
Senator, wondering that the final days of this primary season, have you found any moments to reflect on everything that this campaign has done for you and all the people you've met?
What I see when I look out to crowds of many, many thousands of people, when I go out into the farm country here in California, and I see Latino kids and black kids and white kids and working class people out there, many people who have not been involved in the political process, I see such incredible hope in their eyes.
See, that's why we love him, because he sees the people, he sees in their faces. He knows us.
You think it is appropriate to tell us that they love Muhammad Ali, but they hate Muslims?
Yeah, the first time he hugged a hijabi on TV, that's where I was like, we're in deep, we can't go back.
Just like an old Jewish guy, you know, but his message is what's powerful.
How am I going to handle June 7th? How am I going to handle, the results? Am I going to be, really depressed and really disappointed?
No matter what the outcome of this election is, Bernie started a revolution amongst the millennials. Watch this. Look, Bernie Sanders was shaking everybody's hands, and when he came to me, I screamed. I was like, Bernie! I gave him a hug. Thank you for giving me a voice! Thank you so much for giving me a voice!
A lot of people don't understand how hard it is to go through the immigration system. I've been through it myself, so I spent 25 years trying to get legal in this country. So I understand how complicated it is, and he seems to understand it as well.
When he first came out, even we were like, all right, I don't know if he's going to make a huge splash, but he will be able to move people to the left.
Just the way he speaks and the way he's able to articulate everything so clearly, my 11-year-old, he was able to understand what Bernie is saying.
I'm a member of the 1%. Bernie is bae!
It's amazing how authenticity sounds really good, and he doesn't seem super polished. I mean, half the time his hair is unkempt, but I would hear him talk about oligarchy and sort of a rigged system, and I started looking into him maybe a few years ago before he was running, and I couldn't believe he was a career politician. I thought he was just some fringe dude, but he's been doing that for a long time, and I trust that message. There's so much momentum going towards Bernie, and even if it's a third party that comes up out of this next few months, there's people that are not going to stop.
And so we've just been really busy. We had lacrosse games, we had prom. I mean, we had stuff to do today, but we were like, we gotta go. Let's go.
Anyone knows the average contribution?
The $27 thing, the casino capitalism, the 1%, the billionaires and millionaires. So many kids we know just identify with what he says, and I think there's just a lot of frustration with, especially, at least for me, economic inequality. I think it's hard for people to realize the privilege that they had, and I think he's mentioned that a lot before, but there are a lot of kids and teenagers out there who aren't afforded the same opportunities as we are, and I'd like to know that they would have the same chances to get an education as we do. I don't think it's sad that there's an end. I think all of his policies and everything that he's talking about, it still has momentum.
When I was a student at Berkeley, that's when I first heard about Bernie Sanders. One of his main campaign points is the whole tuition-free college. People are tired of going to debt just so they can get an education, just so they can get a better life for themselves. So that's a huge selling point for college students. It's kind of still taboo in some circles, but he's the one guy who says, take weed off of the Schedule I list. Stop punishing people for smoking weed. And guess what? College students smoke a lot of weed.
My first political rally ever.
I served in the military
considered myself libertarian for a while and then slowly converted. The once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be able to cast a vote for a guy who actually believes what I believe, win, lose, or draw, I can't pass that up. The little bird landed on that. This little thing managed to find its way in the middle of it all.
Birdie? Yeah. I mean, that's like an iconic one. He's just a cute man. He's like a cute old man.
It was just really endearing and really lovable. That was a really cool moment for his campaign.
When the bird meme came out, that like destroyed the group chat. It froze.
You can't script that stuff.
Even though I had kind of an affinity to the Clintons before, just thinking about some of the policies that he had and that she supported makes me, think I should be more independent about it and vote for the issues that are important now. And there's a lot.
If Bernie broke off and did independent, would you vote for Bernie as an independent?
No, I don't think he would get in that way.
Right. I think we disagree on that a little bit.
When I look out at those young people and working class people who want real change in this country, who are prepared to be involved in the political process, I get very, very inspired. And that, in fact, is exactly where I get my energy to go forward.
Our thanks to the great Griffin Hammond and his valet, Matt Negrin. You guys do not go to Tijuana. You'll never come back. All right, up next. Paul Ryan didn't only talk about Donald Trump at his morning news conference. The Speaker of the House also unveiled the first in a series of new policy proposals. We will discuss what he said about the Republican agenda in the next Congress right after this. And don't forget, if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can listen to us as well on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back.
Today at a press conference in Washington, D.C., the House Speaker Paul Ryan launched his election year policy agenda with a set of anti-poverty proposals listing problems with the country's current social welfare system and job training and some prescriptions for how to fix things. Joining us now to talk about that plan, Ryan's effort to keep his party unified, and more, two smart people. Lanhee Chen, the former policy director for Mitt Romney's presidential campaign, joins us from Stanford at Hoover Institution, where he is affiliated. And here in the studio, Mike Duhame, a senior strategist for Governor Christie, including on his presidential campaign, and a former political director of the Republican National Committee. Gentlemen, thank you for coming.
It's like a big cheese.
Lanhee, let me ask you about Speaker Ryan's proposals. Again, dealing a lot with the safety net and trying to make programs more efficient on that and job training. What did the Speaker propose today, this task force propose, that you think could find bipartisan consensus in Congress and around the country?
You know, Mark, today was a historic day. We actually had policy from the U.S. House of Representatives. I mean, this is a really remarkable effort on the part of Paul Ryan and his colleagues. It's a strong agenda, an anti-poverty agenda that includes consolidation of a lot of programs to help people make them more efficient. I think that could see bipartisan support. There's this notion of pay for performance or pay for success, so the federal government is only funding programs that work. I think that could get bipartisan support. And there's also just a really strong notion of reinstituting work, and that's something that Democrats supported back in 1996 with welfare reform, and they could support again in looking at how to reform our anti-poverty program. So really a strong, robust agenda, and I'm really glad you guys are covering it.
Lonnie, let me ask you a question that mixes policy and politics before I turn to Duham here, which is it not the case that in a presidential election year that traditionally that the only hope for policies to be advanced is if the presidential nominee advances them? Do you agree with that, or do you think Paul Ryan could really make progress with this agenda even if Trump doesn't care about it?
Well, I think precisely because of the dynamic between Trump and Paul Ryan, this policy agenda could be something that gets some attention because, you know, Trump has been a policy-free zone. I don't see that changing. I don't think that's his strength, and that's not something he focuses on. So if he says, look, Paul Ryan, you do the policy, then it is a great opportunity, I think, for Paul Ryan to be out there talking about these issues. And it's a different question whether people are actually interested and whether it gets covered. But even when we did policy on a presidential campaign, I'm not sure too many people covered it anyway. So the chances are decent for Paul's agenda to move forward, I think.
Mike, let me just ask you, if you were working for Donald Trump right now and Paul Ryan's poverty proposals came out, how would you, if you went to Donald Trump, given his strengths and weaknesses as a candidate, how would you say, Mr. Trump, we really should adopt this policy. Here's how you should go and sell it. Here's how you can make this your own.
In many ways, I'd embrace those policies because oftentimes as Republicans, I think we get seen as heartless and callous and only caring about fiscal issues. And I think when you start talking about poverty, I really applaud Speaker Ryan for doing this. I think Republicans who've been successful, especially on the state level, have done well talking about issues that go beyond that in terms of empowering people economically, empowering them through education and choice in that way. So I really think it's something that would be good for the party long term. I agree with Lonnie that oftentimes policy gets lost in this, but with the proliferation of cable television and online issues, I think that the ability for this to be discussed more robustly just based on those changes will help.
Lonnie, let me ask you this as devil's advocate. These are talking about federal programs. What about the 10th Amendment? Why shouldn't governors deal with poverty in their states and not try to make Washington more efficient?
Great question. I mean, part of what Paul Ryan is proposing is to give states more of a say in how anti-poverty programs are handled. But, you know, some of this coordination does come from the federal level. But absolutely, I think you're going to see that as a theme in more and more of these policy rollouts that Paul Ryan's doing over the next 6 weeks, which is how there are programs that are working at the federal level and those that aren't, how they might be consolidated, how the states can play a bigger role. I think that's going to be a theme across issue areas, ranging all the way to health care in the next couple weeks.
Mike, I got to ask you about Donald Trump and these latest comments. Governor Christie, your boss and friend, was not particularly strong in denouncing what Donald Trump said. Many others have been. When this chapter of this campaign is written, what will people remember about what's happened since Donald Trump raised the issue of the judge and his Mexican ancestry?
I think it'll be seen as a big mistake. I think it's not good for the party. It's not good for his campaign. The judge he's from Indiana. I mean, this is a mistake, and it's bad, and it's wrong. And I think Governor Christie is somebody who's known him for many years, and so sees him differently in terms of that way, and doesn't judge him by one set of comments. But I think certainly as we look back on the campaign, this will be seen as a chapter. But it'll be seen a chapter of many things that he said that are going to be questionable. And I think all of us who've been through the primary process and throughout have thought many times that, boy, that's the one that's going to undo it, and it doesn't. And it doesn't because seemingly going counterintuitive to what everybody says is what his voters and supporters are finding appealing in him. But this case, I think, will be seen as something that was a big mistake and something that people are right to object to.
Let me ask you a question we discussed in the A block real quick. Is this the statement he put out today? Is it enough? I mean, there's a lot of Republicans freaking out over the course of the last 72 hours. Donors, electeds, et cetera. Trump put a statement out today. You've seen the statement. Is that enough to stop the bleeding?
I think it's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's enough. I think he's got to turn the page. Quite frankly, as for his campaign, he should be talking about Hillary Clinton, not about Trump University, not about a federal judge in Indiana. He should be talking about differences in policy between he and Hillary Clinton from a big aspirational point of view. I agree with Lonnie that it's not a lot of deep policy, but there are major policy differences going forward. And quite frankly, I don't think there'll be unity in the party until they focus on the differences between between he and Hillary Clinton.
Mike Duhame, thank you. Lonnie Chen, many degrees, none as far as I know, though, from Trump U. Thank you very much. We'll be right back with some final thoughts about the primary contests being held today.
How taken aback, how surprised were you at the call last night that Hillary Clinton is a presumptive Democratic nominee?
What I was upset is what the AP did. They got on the phone, as I understand it, and they started hounding superdelegates to tell them in an anonymous way who they'd be voting for. And the night before, the largest primary, biggest primary in the whole process, they make this announcement. So I was really disappointed in what the AP did.
Sanders talking to NBC's Lester Holt in California today. What's your view about the AP call last night?
You know, I mean, I think news organizations should publish their tally, but they should say this is not final until the actual votes are counted.
I think the AP was fine, but I think everybody who's written the words like she's clinched or she's secured, not true. She's not clinched, she's not secured. She's on track, but she's not done either one of those things. All right, keep refreshing BloombergPolitics.com tonight for all your updates on the nomination contest in California, New Jersey, and the other states. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, Emily Chang talking to Stanford University President John Hennessy. John Hennessy, man, he's a smart dude. That's up on Bloomberg West. We will be back tomorrow. Mark and I will. We'll be in Cleveland. Cleveland
rocks.
Special show from the site of the Republican Convention. Until then, we say to you, sayonara.